Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a show for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes. You can also engage with us through Twitter and Facebook. We would love to hear from you. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to many friends as Mags.
Hi, everyone. We have a great conversation to share with you today. We are going to talk with an insurance and risk management expert about some of the common risks involved in short-term missions. Of course, when we talk about ministry in a cross-cultural environment especially, we cannot eliminate risk entirely. But Ken will share with us 5 best practices that can help churches and mission agencies and teams manage risk appropriately. There are some points in this conversation I've got to say are a little scary because we'll hear about some worst case scenarios that have taken place over the years. But the goal in sharing some of this is to help encourage us to be well prepared. Ken is himself a believer and brings a balanced perspective of both trusting in God because he is sovereign while doing our appropriate due diligence. As we get started, it's important to give just a bit of a disclaimer here. We want to be very clear that this information is not intended to be specific legal or insurance advice. This episode is presented as a resource to help understand risk, insurance, and some of the legal issues, and to help identify and reduce some of those foreseeable and preventable risks. Any short-term mission initiative will have particular realities that are unique to that situation. It is important that these are specifically reviewed with the appropriate qualified insurance and legal professionals in your country, in your state, or your province. So, with those important things said, let's get to today's conversation. Our guest today is Ken Hall, who for now 30 years has been serving churches and Christian charitable organizations. Ken is sitting right here in my office with me today. This is a bit special, Ken, because usually we're recording by Skype or something, and it's great to have you in the office here.
Well, thank you very much, Max.
Ken has over 7,000 client organizations that he works with and his team works with now, so he has incredible experience in helping Christian charities address risk management and insurance questions. He also serves on the steering committee of the Plan to Protect program, which many of us know from our church environments. And today we're going to talk about 5 best practices when it comes to making sure we have safe short-term missions. Our conversation will go to different areas, and I'll let Ken talk about some of these things, but very glad to have you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Just before we get going, let's take a minute to introduce you to our audience a bit. Tell us a little bit about your current role in helping churches and charities with risk management.
Yeah, we work with leaders from churches in a variety of charities, Bible colleges, campgrounds, inner city missions, relief development organizations. What we do is we work with board members, administrators, pastors, and other leaders in providing not just an insurance product, but also customized risk management tools, advice, and solutions to try to help them meet their legal duty of care. And in this particular respect, for what we're talking about today, keeping their mission trip participants safe. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, we did a study back a few years ago and discovered that our client organizations represent almost 150,000 trips a year by Canadians into the developing world.
Wow. So there's a lot of experience here. Ken and his team have just a rich perspective to bring. You're working on some presentations and some workshops right now. I'm not sure what you call them, seminars perhaps, with the 4 C's,
yes.
Which in Canada is I got to get the 4 C's right here.
I'll do it for you if you want.
You go.
It's the Canadian Council of Christian Charities.
There it is. And I do know those 4 C's too. But what are those seminars? What do those seminars include?
This is a new thing for both of our organizations working together on seminars. We do a variety of topics. Some of it is compliance issues with Canada Revenue Agencies, legal updates, and a lot of risk management, everything from abuse prevention, safe transportation, safe mission trips. We're also starting to discuss the issue of the Me Too movement and implications in the Christian workplace.
Wow.
But the seminar itself, the series is called Advancing Ministry Together. And what we're trying to do is bring kind of a wealth of information to local church and charity leaders. So far, our tour, we've visited 6 out of 8 locations across Ontario. So the tour continues.
Okay. And will they all be in Ontario? Are they all in Ontario?
This first round is all in Ontario,
Okay.
but we've already had some requests for Western provinces to do the same thing.
Very good. Okay. Well, as we begin to kind of zoom in on our topic a little bit of short-term missions, I know in your material you talk about 3 macro categories of concern, of interest. Let's begin by just saying, what are those 3 categories of risk?
The 3 categories that we've identified are based primarily on our experience from claims, things that have gone wrong. Mm-hmm. And we've tried to put some of these things in perspective in terms of frequency and severity. In insurance, when we talk about frequency, we talk about how many things a negative result happens, like a claim. When we talk about severity, we talk about things when they happen, they're extreme, whether it can be measured in terms of permanent serious injuries, fatalities, or major lawsuits. The other thing, just to sort of set the table a little bit on this too, is when we talk about risk management, everybody has their idea or conception of what that means. But I've always found it very helpful that when you start to look at risk management, that you identify your risk. And every organization is going to be a little bit different, including for short-term missions. How you set up your trips, where you go, how your leadership team is set up with, who you connect with in the field, and what you're doing there. You almost need to take an inventory of your particular set of risks. And when we look at the overview of mission risk, what we see generally in aggregate across all of our organizations, the 3 areas, the first is security. Certainly it's in the news now. Mm-hmm. It encompasses everything from violent crimes, garden variety crimes, the issue of kidnap and ransom, war, civil war, insurrection. A topic right now that's on everybody's mind, and that's terrorism, mm-hmm. especially with porous borders in countries where previously it was considered stable, but we see incursions of groups within those borders, making those countries less safe than we previously thought. Okay. Secondary is health and medical, everything from infectious diseases. Certainly there's a long list of diseases that we have to be considering when we're sending teams abroad. Yeah. We can add more recently things like Ebola and Zika virus, but it is a long list. Tropical diseases like malaria, poisonous bites and stings from all kinds of little critters that we don't have here in North America, and cardiovascular health. When we're sending people abroad, have we screened them for previous medical conditions, pre-existing conditions, and how capable are they able to do what we're asking them to do? Sometimes in extreme weather conditions or at high altitudes. Okay. And the third area is injury and liability. Mm-hmm. And mission teams are very focused on specialty causes, reasons, programs based on who they're sending abroad and what skills they have. But this could include things like construction, agricultural injuries. Mm-hmm. Automobile accidents are always a concern, just as they are here in Canada or the US. Mm-hmm. When you go abroad, of course, and you see conditions of roads,
it can be increased. I was just in Kampala. We were talking about Uganda, and the boda, the little motorcycles that people are riding on, and it is just not safe. It's cheap and it's fast, but it is not safe. Yes. And some mission agencies, I learned, actually have policies that their people are not allowed to use that. It's that risky.
Yes.
Anyway, it's like you said, there are a whole raft of new factors when we're in a different environment.
Yeah. Try to find a seatbelt in some of those cars and countries. Yeah. And there is other forms of transportation where you have to think clearly about whether you're going to use them and to what degree you arrange that in advance with organizations or businesses that have been vetted, whether we're talking about chartering aircraft, boats, ferries. There's just not the same standards of safety. And so thinking ahead on planning these, it becomes an important component of your mission trip safety. And the other part of injury and liability is the issue of abuse prevention. Just as it is here in Canada and the US, we have to think in terms of policies, procedures, and screening when we're doing youth missions or when we're working with children, youth, and vulnerable persons abroad.
Wow, what an important list. You know, for some of us, it might be a little scary. I mean, we're talking about kind of the bad news here and how to make sure that we properly try and prevent whatever parts of the bad news we can and addressing it if and when it does come up. So this is going to be, I think, very interesting to our listeners. You've identified, and it's simplistic, I understand, but 5 best practices. And I'd like to use that as the model for the rest of our time here primarily, to introduce us to these 5 best practices for groups that want to participate in short-term missions, your advice based on tons of experience on what we should consider. So let's begin. What's the first best practice?
Yeah, and before I get started with that, I just want to say that we have this 5-point checklist. What's the purpose behind it? Because sometimes when we're being asked to do things, why are we doing this? And certainly the key thing that we want to think about is avoiding unnecessary risk of injury and harm to your own participants. In a larger sense, we want to demonstrate a positive testimony for our organization to participants, their loved ones at home, and the people that we're reaching. And then, of course, there's carrot and stick. And the stick part of it is we're trying to reduce the possibility of a lawsuit against your organization's directors when you're sponsoring mission trips. The 5-point checklist has really been designed with that in mind. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, it's the importance of ensuring that all trip participants have emergency travel medical insurance, one that's effective, one where there's verifiable proof that the participants that are going, whether they're going as a group or they're taking different flight plans to get there, give the organization proof that they have coverage in place. Because quite frankly, a lack of coverage can result in an uninsured medical bill and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of uninsured costs, which have been known to come back and boomerang against the organization in the form of a lawsuit.
Wow. So medical insurance, does everybody have proper medical insurance? We face a question sometimes where in our organization, we're doing short-term missions. People come to us and they say, well, thanks. We have our own insurance. We have had a practice of simply saying, this is a short-term mission. We are providing the insurance period. You have to take the additional if they already have insurance. I wonder do you have any particular advice for a missions group as they're thinking through this? They'll obviously talk to an agency, talk to SEND or PAOC, whoever they're going with. Any advice on what are the key considerations when insuring a group for short-term missions?
Travel insurance is a product that is available through quite a wide variety of sources. Organizations from Blue Cross, banks are offering it now, insurance companies, specialty companies. Mm-hmm. So it's a real, extreme range of products and services. Sometimes people think they even have coverage through their credit card. They don't really read the membership agreement. It looks like they have it, but what they find out is they have a 1-800 number to call, and maybe we'll give you some advice. Other travel products are kind of bare bones, but there are also travel insurance products that are extremely broad and comprehensive. And we can, you can go through a checklist of what's covered in terms of trip cancellation, interruption. We can go through various indemnities for lost baggage, et cetera, et cetera. You can look at the limit of coverage for medical, but you really need to focus in on a few key areas. And so here's what I would suggest, and this is a generic piece of advice that you can apply to anybody. Firstly, in the insurance policy itself, the two key areas you have to focus in on is the exclusions or conditions for pre-existing medical conditions or changes in medical health within 60 days of departure. Both of those can be grounds for denial of an insurance claim by many insurance policies. The second thing, and I know we'll probably talk about this later on as we go, but is the issue of, is there territories or countries where this medical insurance is null and void? And for that, you really have to almost look to our respective governments. In Canada, it's Global Affairs Canada. In the US, it's the State Department, to their travel warnings and advisories. So do bear those things in mind. Those are key exclusions to be familiar with. The other thing that people often don't realize as consumers is that insurance for travel, although it seems like a commodity and you try to compare it on price, it's actually the back-end medical assistance provider that makes all the difference in the world. Are they telling me to call a 1-800 number if I have a claim and they say, send us the bills when you get home? Or in a medical emergency, is it a physician-led response? Triaging your condition, finding you reliable ground transportation, and getting you to the right accredited clinic. Sometimes the place where you need to go is 37 kilometers away, not 11 kilometers away. Right. And if you don't get to the right place in a developing country, sometimes a lack of care can cause a relatively minor infection or fracture to become life-threatening.
Right. Great principles to follow. I'll just mention to our listeners again that we do show notes and we'll compile some of the key points that Ken is mentioning here. We also want to say that we're not stating any particular product or exactly do this. We're covering principles here, and it will be important for everybody to work in their particular situation to find the product that serves them best. Okay, so that's all in number one, medical insurance, what's best practice number two?
Well, best practice number two is related to the first one. And it really is the idea that anyone who's a candidate for short-term mission trips, anyone who's a participant, should be required by the sponsoring organization to check with their own family doctor, their own physician, to make sure that there aren't any pre-existing medical conditions based on their doctor's understanding of their medical history that might prevent them from taking part in this trip. I mean, nowadays travel, period, is stressful. Doesn't matter whether it's for vacation or short-term missions. And I kind of refer to this as loading the gun. Sometimes people say, somebody had a heart attack on a mission trip, and it was a surprise or an accident. But if you think about it, what we're doing often is recruiting people here in North America who might be relatively sedentary, working at desk jobs. Maybe they're taking some high blood pressure medication, as is apparently 30 to 40% of our population. Maybe overweight, maybe some pre-existing cardiovascular health issues in their family. We're putting them on this long flight somewhere. At the other end, we're loading them in a country where maybe there's higher temperatures, higher humidity, working at altitude. We're putting them up on a ladder, and something happens. There's a heart attack or a stroke or something, and it's a big surprise. But what we've really done is, in a sense, unintentionally loaded a gun, and it's gone off. So there's a certain amount of responsibility on the part of the sponsoring organization to make sure that the missionary candidate's health is acceptable for what it is that you're planning for them.
Really important to do our homework. We do want to find people and encourage people to participate, but we've got to make sure that they are ready. They're healthy. In this case, you've mentioned some physical health things. And I know you've got stories about this. You can tell from the way Ken is talking that he's got actual stories there. Is there anything more that you'd add to this idea of having health checks? Any quick advice that you would say for someone on a missions committee and they're putting together a trip, everybody just needs to visit the doctor and a doctor sign off? Is it that simple?
Yeah, there is the aspect of doctors also being able to assist in the process of giving good direction for the types of immunizations that participants should have. I could say many, many different things in terms of tips based on experience and things that have gone wrong. But one of the things to definitely avoid is where there is immunization required. So whether we're talking about anti-malarial drugs or say something like Twinrix for hepatitis A and B, a lot of these inoculations and immunizations have maximum efficacy. That's a word that I learned from a doctor that specializes in international travel.
Sure, yeah.
But maximum efficacy is about 6 weeks in advance of the departure date. And if you have people trying to squeeze these immunizations in just before
2 days before they lift off,
it's next to useless. So these are the kinds of things where I know you can't police everybody all the time, but you've got to make some efforts to make sure that this is communicated and reasonably that it's being done.
Very helpful. You can hear from Ken's comments that he has lots of experience on this. And Ken, at the end, I'll invite you to just make our audience known about other resources that you would recommend through your firm for here in Canada and so forth. Okay, so we've got the first two, medical insurance and health checks. What is the best practice number 3?
One of the things that we suggest to our client organizations to consider is how important youth missions is to their overall objects, goals, and mandates. Certainly, there's many churches and charities that have a focus on youth missions, and given enough expertise, resources, and effort, it can be done. But generally speaking, it's recommended that mission trip participants be adults of legal age, and that's 18 or 19 years of age, depending on which provinces you are here in Canada. It's split 6-6. So you have to pay attention to where you are. Okay. In the United States, the age of majority depends on jurisdiction and application, but generally it's 18 years of age as well. And there are reasons for that, which I'm happy to get into. But I think just to sort of start off, there's a recent tragic case of a teenager on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic who suffered a fall from a balcony at a resort where the group was staying. It resulted in a $17 million lawsuit against the mission sending organization and the participating church and the trip leaders. And there's other examples as well. And these types of claims and situations have resulted in some quarters of a rethinking of children being placed in potentially dangerous destinations and situations, whether it's by schools, not-for-profits, charities. And it's brought into sharp focus the high duty of care and legal realities associated with sponsoring travel with minors. And this is, by the way, not just something that's being reviewed by faith charities, but also by scholastic organizations. There were quite a few groups that were caught in Haiti during the earthquake and the aftermath. And a lot of the resources that should have been focused, or the victims wound up being focused on getting these kids out. And even with that, there were lawsuits, if you can believe it, by parents back in Canada and the United States because of the mental anguish suffered by their children during the earthquake and its aftermath.
An important consideration is just how kids, you said that really well, how kids and youth fit into your intention.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, you're cautioning, really, I hear a caution. Yeah. It's going to be generally wiser to have adults participate in short-term missions. Wow.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of practical issues here that oftentimes people don't think about, because however well-meaning and accepting a family might be regarding the risk of their child being injured, killed, or acquiring a life-threatening tropical or infectious disease while on a trip, and however much they may not have the intention beforehand to ever think about suing the organization, the reality of a child requiring extensive medical care or suffering permanent damage for the remainder of their lives will often cause a change in heart and simply force parents towards a legal recourse to avoid personal financial hardship.
I think it's a really important point. It's not because they're trying to be mean or just get money out of the situation. They will face realities of adjusting their lives and their families' lives for a long time, years or longer even. This is a necessity, even
Absolutely.
On their part. Yeah.
And I think the other reality that is behind all of this too is you have to remember that a waiver or release signed by or on behalf of a child by a parent or guardian is generally considered legally unenforceable. Adults can waive rights. Children can't waive rights. And so what you're faced with as an organization is that if there's high risk associated with the trip, you're really assuming entire absolute responsibility for anything that goes wrong.
Wow. These are important things to understand in an environment of good intention and best intention until something serious goes wrong.
There's no doubt there's a value for young people traveling abroad in terms of personal, spiritual, life skills development, whether it be parents with schools, with mission-sending organizations, with their own churches. But I think leaders of the organization have to really weigh whether the benefits of advancing their programs and their ministries to those they're trying to reach are really worth the risk. And frankly, the high level of care and qualified supervision required to keep minors safe on those trips.
Very good advice and sobering, but important for us to understand. Hope you're finding this helpful. We've got the first 3 best practices covered. In just a moment, Ken's going to give us best practices 4 and 5 about managing risk in short-term missions. First, though, we'd like to share with you this missions resource that we hope will be helpful to you and your church.
Do you lead a missions prayer group? Or perhaps you're wanting to be more intentional about praying for God's work around the world. Operation World, both a book and a website, will provide you with detailed information on each country in the world, along with detailed prayer requests so that you can pray for kingdom activity happening in the world today. Visit globalmissionspodcast.com today to learn more about Operation World and where you can get a copy. And now, back to today's conversation.
Okay, we're back with Ken Hall, who is an expert in helping churches and Christian charities in risk management and insurance protection. Ken, you've given us the first 3 best practices. What is the 4th best practice?
Well, it relates to waivers and releases. And as I alluded to earlier, although they're generally unenforceable with minors, they are enforceable with adults. And really, our recommendation here is that sponsoring organizations should ensure that all trip participants complete and sign a waiver as part of their registration in advance of the mission trip or the assignment. And there's a few component parts to a waiver. People think about waivers in extremes like this is going to save us from any legal liability to this is worthless. And of course, the truth always lies somewhere in the middle. But an effective waiver, whether this is being done in Canada or the United States, has a lot of a component of what's called informed consent. There's these great waivers that have been written in the past with legalese and people have signed it, but it hasn't told the signee what the risk is. And so to be enforceable in a court case, and courts have ruled on this continuously, to waive a right means you understand what the risk was. And so the informed consent part of it becomes very important, where the sponsoring organization puts the registrant on notice of what the potential risks are in terms of the country where they're traveling, or the region more specifically, but also the work they'll be doing as well. And just as a little bit of a practical tip, a lot of savvy organizations are now including not pages and pages of risks, but rather links to either the US State Department or Canadian Global Affairs website for travel advisories and warnings. It's an effective way to satisfy that informed consent on the part of the ministry candidates, who must really say, I've read and understand and accept the risks inherent in the country or region of travel based on what is included and contained on my own government's website.
And that would be considered to be adequate and hopefully, and I expect, up to date with what might be changing, and a ministry may not be able to keep track of everything, and then they would check the box, so to speak, or maybe literally in these consent forms, that an applicant or a participant has read and understood the risks.
Correct. And whether it's done online, electronically, or whether it's done in hard copy, what you're really getting the registrant to state is that I have spent the time to read it, and I do understand those risks. And the point is, they're the risks that are inherent in the country. And so what follows from that is then the waiver. And the waiver is basically, it's protecting the organization, its directors, officers, its trip leaders for any bodily injury or damage suffered by the participants due to the inherent travel risks, the work and destinations, the conditions that were beyond the control of the sponsoring organization that were clearly expressed and communicated to the registrant, which is a very fair way of handling the risk issue, I think.
I wonder whether there is a sample document. Do you have such a document that is being typically used as a template?
There are some templates that we can offer. This is one of those difficult circumstances where it really amounts almost to specific legal advice. So at Robertson Hall, what we do is we give checklists that organizations can actually take to a lawyer. And essentially what it does is it really reduces the amount of time and effort in terms of consulting and billable hours, I guess, with no disrespect to the legal profession. But we work closely with organizations, so they're able to really tee the ball up for their lawyers in getting the right wording and the right things addressed. And we tend to find that works the best.
Well, that's another great idea when you hear the services provided by Robertson Hall to try and minimize those costs, but still make sure that it's covered appropriately. Better to spend this preventative cost than to face some of the potential challenges that you've mentioned. Otherwise, it can be protracted too. So the fourth best practice then, making sure that we have appropriate consent. Anything else to add on the consent front?
Well, simply, again, going back to the youth mission component, if you are going to have under 18s on your trip, you're then adding a parental permission component for any minors participating in the trip, including proper letters for travel purposes.
Super. Well, that's 4 out of 5. We come to the last one. What is the fifth best practice you have to recommend?
Save the best for last, so to speak. But we really do find this is a great duty of care resource. And it is simply that the sponsoring organization and trip leaders should be checking with their respective governments' travel advisory and warning websites. In Canada here, that would be Global Affairs Canada, previously known as Department of Foreign Affairs International Trade, previously known as External Affairs. In the US, it's the State Department. And they have a great website with a complete index of countries with travel warnings and advisories, and also even broken down to regions within those countries. If you navigate around that website, you look at destinations that you're considering going to, it's giving you a lot of information about what is reasonable, what is safe in sending mission teams. And what you really want to pay attention to is that if you're dealing with youth missions or even adult missions where it's non-essential travel, there will be countries or destinations where your government is flat out telling you, avoid non-essential travel. If you choose to send people into those areas for non-essential travel, and something does go wrong, I can tell you very quickly, these websites are going to be used by a victim or plaintiff's lawyer in a bodily injury to prove your negligence.
I just recently had a trip that took me both to Europe and to Africa, and the Canadian site that you're mentioning was a help to me in understanding what the environment I was going to. And there certainly would be enough information, as you said, for someone afterwards. If something went wrong, you check the box that you had checked this, or at least that's what we're recommending in the previous note of consent.
Yes.
Yeah, really, really important. And Canadian and U.S. separate sites. Anything further that you'd say on the government travel advice?
Well, first thing is it's very convenient, but both the U.S. and Canadian sites work off the same principle. If you're looking at the website, there's essentially 4 levels of advisories or warnings. In Canada here, level 1 is exercise a normal degree of caution. So for our Canadian travelers going to the United States, that's where the U.S. fits into, and probably vice versa.
Right. Yeah.
You just exercise a normal degree of caution. Level 2 is exercising a higher degree of caution. These are countries with increased or heightened risk for some reason. It could be related to an ongoing natural disaster. It could be related to violence. It could be related to something to do with drug trade. There's many factors or reasons why there's a heightened alert. Keep in mind, though, even within these warnings, there are level 2 countries with level 3 or level 4 regions.
Okay.
And so Mexico is a very good example. And because it's such a popular destination, both for Canadian and American short-term mission teams, it's a good case in point because it's been the case in the past probably 8 or 9 years that the bordering areas on the U.S. and Mexico are the most dangerous. And it's because of the disruption of the drug trade, traditional drug cartels, which has also made those border areas less safe. There's a lot more collateral violence than when the drug cartels were running business kind of under the radar in a very highly disciplined way. So counterintuitively, the war on drugs has made those regions less safe. But it's also put a lot of our organizations that traditionally do work in that area, including a lot of Mennonite groups who have a presence there, in an area of much greater harm.
Wow. So important principle there. It's not just the country, but make sure you understand the region or regions that you and your team might be in.
Exactly.
Very good.
And certainly we talked about porous borders earlier on, but there are some countries too where if you're up against certain borders, you're definitely in a riskier area. So don't always look at just the country. Look within the actual report or advisory to see where the sensitive areas are. If we move on to level 3 and level 4, level 3 is avoid non-essential travel. Again, if you're working with an NGO or a charity that's providing essential care, whether it's after a natural disaster, if it's famine relief, some sort of an emergency, you've got professionals working there. That's what they're there for. But again, these non-essential short-term mission teams, where you can reschedule a trip at a later date when the heightened warning has been removed, makes a lot of sense from a duty of care standpoint.
I think that's a great distinction to make. Here today, we're focusing and talking about short-term teams that might be anywhere from several days to a few weeks, probably, on average. It's an important conversation, but a different conversation to talk about ensuring people who are there on a long-term basis, professionally based, intentionally there.
Exactly.
Yeah. So make sure you take these comments in context. You mentioned level 4. I'm curious, what was level 4?
Well, in this case, your government is telling you individuals and groups should not be traveling to these countries or regions. In a sense, I've been told by the Canadian government that if you choose as a Canadian traveler to go to these locations, there's really no responsibility on the part of the government to get you out.
Wow.
Because you've gone against a very explicit warning of avoid all travel. And again, it's a comparable warning in the State Department site as well. These are countries like Afghanistan, Syria, parts of other countries like Mindanao in the Philippines or in the South Sudan. I'm just picking examples, not picking on them, but just for purposes of illustration. And the only exception to being there would be, quite frankly, if you're part of a government-sponsored international relief initiative with full security under the supervision of national or international policekeeping forces, and probably in an armored personnel carrier as well, but definitely not short-term mission teams.
Right. Good advice. Let's not send our kids there.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, these very 5, let me just review them just quickly. Number 1 was medical insurance, proper medical insurance. Number 2 is proper health checks. 3rd is a recommendation that there not be minors. And if there are, very careful measures taken. Number 4 is appropriate consent. And number 5 is making sure you check the government recommendations for travel to that country and areas in that country. I wonder, Ken, this is just so helpful. Are there other tips or resources that you would like to mention might be helpful to our audience?
Some of these don't really fit in a category, but they're just common sense.
Sure.
We sometimes forget about them. Mm-hmm. So based on experience with claims and things that have gone wrong, or things that have gone wrong and been made worse, I can offer a few tips. The first is, as much as possible, you want to partner with international charities and agencies who already operate in the area where you're working or traveling. You want to utilize, whether it's local missionaries, individuals, churches, organizations who can provide you with invaluable local insight, guidance, security, protection, telling you what to wear, how to appear in public, what not to do. Even sometimes in some countries, in some places, it's okay to be, in a particular area between 9 and 5 on a weekday, but not late at night or on the weekend. And that's local knowledge. And for a church that's sending short-term missions, tapping into that local knowledge is critical.
This is actually reinforcing, Ken doesn't maybe even realize this, but we talk about, yes, short-term mission can be very valuable in advancing different intentions, different ideas, but linking it together with long-term mission is really where we see the best fruit, where those are woven in. And when you do have workers who know that context, know the language, know whether after 6 it's not safe to be in that area, it's just another very natural outcome of bringing short-term and long-term into a bonded handshake. Yeah.
Agreed. Another practical tip I would suggest is creating a medical emergency response plan, a MERP for short. It's a plan that includes key medical, transportation, security, and consular contact information in the hands of your trip leaders. What do you do if this happens, if there is a medical emergency, if there's an injury? Rather than putting trip leaders in a position of making things up on the fly and chancing the fact that things can become worse after the fact. Very important piece of information, something that you share not only with trip leaders, but you also keep here at home so that everybody knows if there is an emergency, here's what's going to happen, here's who's going to be contacted.
A great piece of advice to have that MERP in place, MERP, Medical Emergency Response Plan.
You got it.
All right.
Related to that, and again, I mentioned earlier about medical assistance providers being at the back end of travel insurance products. It is really important to ask or find out with your travel insurance plan who is providing the medical assistance. Is it simply a 1-800 number with no context in the field? Or is it an organization? And I'll cite one example simply because they're the largest in the world. International SOS has 11,000 physicians and triaging registered nurses worldwide with accredited health clinics, 40 aircraft. They do a medical evacuation somewhere in the world once every 20 minutes. When a client organization or a travel insurance product policyholder calls with a claim, they get a physician-led response, triaging the situation, assisting you with what you should do, where you should go. They have software in the regional headquarters around the world that show them accredited clinics, literally pictures or video clips of the clinics, the operating theaters, the certifications of the doctors and nurses, and the equipment. They have the capability of literally telling you, no, you don't need to go just 11 kilometers to the closest clinic, where, by the way, the local person who takes you there might get a finder's fee, to maybe going 37 kilometers away to an accredited clinic where whatever condition or injury you have can be properly addressed. Mm-hmm. This is a crucial piece of what you need to provide in terms of legal duty of care to keep your people safe. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, and something that we didn't really touch on, I keep using the term legal duty of care. Basically, in law, when you sponsor something like a trip, it's the mission sponsoring organization, be it a church, charity, and their directors, who are considered to be the experts in law. So if you can't be the experts, you got to outsource and have experts to assist you in these situations. Because if it comes to a lawsuit, that's a standard of care.
A little scary for those of us who are in the boardroom, so to speak, but very helpful that it can be done well and it can be covered appropriately. You mentioned SOS. That is a firm that we have engaged through our organization as well. And the ability to speak on the phone, however you can get connected to someone who will speak your language and give you clear advice, both in an immediate situation, you're dealing with an injury or a wound or something like that, what to do there and where to go. Well worth the preparation and anticipation of hopefully a situation you won't need it. But
Absolutely.
Anything else you'd like to mention, Ken?
Well, I would say, generally speaking, again, I know we're speaking to an audience that's both in Canada and the United States.
Yes.
In the United States, you do have some advantages in terms of specialized mission travel insurance products and services. But also, we haven't talked really about this, but even consulting companies, should there be kidnap, ransom, if you're operating in an area where that is a risk. I know in the United States, for example, there are programs through insurers like Brotherhood Mutual. There's a program called Mission Safe, and also I Am Global. All of those companies offer specialized travel insurance for mission sending organizations, including services associated with that. I also know that there's an organization called Crisis Consulting International in the U.S. that responds to kidnap, ransom, disappearance of individuals. So there are certainly some great resources there.
We will include those in the show notes as well, the resources that Ken has mentioned in this case, especially for the United States or on an international scale as well. Ken, we've touched on some really important stuff in a quick way. It's been very helpful. If our listeners would like to reach out and learn more from you and your team, how can they do that?
Certainly our website is fairly straightforward. It's www.robertsonhall.com. And simply go to our Church and Charity Protection Plus homepage. You can find out lots of information about our products and services. Unfortunately, there is, of course, that password protected section of the website for our policyholders.
Sure.
But we do try to share as much information as we can.
Thank you.
And in terms of calling us directly, our toll-free number across Canada and the United States is 1-800-640-0933.
Very good. Well, in a second, I'm just going to ask you if you have any last word that you'd like to speak. If you could imagine speaking to the missions committee in a church who really would like to send a team, they'd like them to be safe. They've looked at the 5 best practices and sought to put those into place. Any last words, if you could address them?
I try to put these in perspective because mission work is a really important part of the expression of Christian faith. It's scriptural, it's essential. And it's true, mission trips do provide the opportunity for life-changing experiences and personal development and for putting our faith into action. But it's just that church and charity leaders should understand the risks and legal responsibilities associated with sponsoring, especially a short-term mission trip and travel outside of Canada. Higher risk locations, higher risk activities, including minors, all of those things need to be weighed carefully to determine whether those risks can be properly managed and steps taken by your leaders to meet your legal duty of care. It's not just about lawsuits, though. It's about our testimony and also our reputation as ministries. And I guess in a way, essentially, it's about the fact that our testimony should be that we not only meet society's standards, we exceed it. And that is important in terms of everything we do as Christians and as Christian ministries.
Well, on behalf of our listeners, thank you very much for sharing some of your wisdom and in a way that's accessible to us. We appreciate it very much. Lord bless you as you serve. You and your team serve many. And thanks for taking the time with us today.
Thanks, Max. It's been great to be here.
Well, that concludes our conversation with Ken. We'd like to mention some other episodes that relate directly to this topic. Back in Season 1, Episode 24 was entitled Myths and Truths of Risk in Missions with Anna Hampton. And then earlier this year, Episode 68 through 71 was a mini-series on how to do short-term missions with excellence. Remember also, you can go to the homepage of the podcast and use the filter there. If you enter short-term mission in there, it will bring out all the episodes that are related to this topic. This podcast is brought to you by the Global Missions Toolbox, a multi-agency collection of trusted resources for pastors, churches, and other Christ followers who want to participate in God's global mission more effectively. The Global Missions Toolbox will launch officially later this year. You can visit globalmissionstoolbox.com to join our pre-launch mailing list and receive samples, updates, and be part of the launch party, which we will put on later this year. Thanks for joining us. The Global Missions Podcast is produced by the Jaffrey Centre for Global Initiatives and Send International of Canada in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. On behalf of our team, thanks for listening, and we invite you to join us again in 2 weeks for the final episode of Season 3, when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.